9 years. Hundreds of homes. Terrified families, snarling dogs, animals that had already put people in the hospital. And one man walked calmly through the door every time. No raised voice, no hesitation, and fixed them. Cesar Millan turned dog training into must-see television watched by 11 million Americans every single week. His face was on screens in 80 countries. He was, by any measure, one of the most famous dog trainers who ever lived. And then it all vanished. But the story of how it ended. Almost nobody got it right. Before any of that, there was a 21-year-old standing at the United States border with $100 in his pocket and a dream he had borrowed from a television screen. Cesar Millan grew up in Culiacan, Mexico, watching Lassie and Rin Tin Tin, and decided by the age of 10 that he was going to be the greatest dog trainer in the world. On his grandfather's farm, animals responded to him differently than they did to anyone else.
No chasing.
No commands barked across a yard. He simply moved, and the dogs understood. Veterinary school was never an option. His family didn't have that kind of money. So the plan was simpler and more dangerous. Get to Hollywood, find the best trainers working with celebrity animals, and learn directly from them. On December 23, 1990, he said goodbye to his mother and got on a bus heading north. The crossing was not clean. The area around the border was dangerous in ways that went far beyond a fence to climb. He crossed anyway. He arrived in California speaking almost no English, knowing nobody, with money that ran out in days. He ended up briefly homeless in San Diego, sleeping in a dog kennel where he had talked his way into a job, eating out of dumpsters. The dogs were cleaner and better fed than he was. But here's where the story starts to turn. He moved to Los Angeles, built a dog walking business in Inglewood, and became good enough that the Los Angeles Times ran a piece about him. Wealthy dog owners found him through that article. Word spreads the way it only spreads when something genuinely works. One of those people was connected to Jada Pinkett Smith, who watched him work and became an immediate believer. She told him plainly, if he was ever going to make it on television, he needed to speak English through a camera lens. She sent a tutor to his apartment in South Central the next day. He studied with the kind of discipline that only someone with nothing to fall back on can manage. He surrounded himself with English speakers and stayed away from Spanish-speaking communities until the language became something he could think in, not translate into. He later credited her without hesitation. Because of Jada, he said, he spoke English. In September 2004, Dog Whisperer with Cesar Millan premiered on the National Geographic Channel. Almost nobody noticed. The network barely promoted it. But word of mouth did what the marketing department didn't bother to do. By season 2, it had been expanded to a full hour in prime time. By season 6, 11 million Americans were watching every single week. In 2009, 18 years after crossing that border with $100, Cesar Millan became a United States citizen. And that's exactly when the ground started to shift beneath him. The scientific community had not been quietly admiring the show. The criticism started almost immediately after the premiere and never stopped building. Cesar's entire method rested on what he called calm assertive energy, the idea that dogs operate within a pack structure, and that when a dog becomes destructive or aggressive, it's almost always because the humans in the household have failed to establish themselves as the leader. The dog fills that vacuum. His job was to walk in, become the calm and assertive presence the animal required, and restore the natural order. On television, this was extraordinary to watch. A dog that had been terrorizing a family for years going quiet within a single afternoon session looked like genuine magic. The idea made intuitive sense to millions of people watching from their sofas. Simple. Visual. Satisfying. The perfect television theory. The problem was that the underlying science had already been falling apart for years before the show ever aired. Dr. Nicholas Dodman, director of the Animal Behavior Clinic at Tufts University, wrote directly to the National Geographic Channel in 2006 to tell them the show had set dog training back by 20 years. A respected animal behavior writer published a piece in the New York Times the same year arguing that the method shown directly contradicted what professional behaviorists and veterinarians had established about how dogs actually work. The specific target was dominance theory, the entire alpha dog framework Cesar had built his career upon. It turned out the original wolf studies that dominance theory was built on had been conducted on captive wolves in artificial conditions, not on natural packs in the wild. When researchers observed wolves in their actual environments, leadership within wolf families looked nothing like the aggressive dominance model. It looked more like parenting. The scientific foundation of the show's central philosophy had already been found to be wrong before a single episode aired. The American Humane Association formally requested the show be cancelled in 2006, calling the methods inhumane and outdated. The American Veterinary Society of Animal Behavior issued a public warning in 2009 that dominance-based training could cause fear and aggression in dogs rather than resolve it. In 2012, British television host Alan Titchmarsh confronted Caesar on camera, playing footage he claimed showed Caesar striking a dog in the throat. Caesar pushed back hard, and his counter-argument was not without substance. He had spent 15 years working with genuinely dangerous animals in real situations, not in research conditions, but in rooms with animals weighing 90 pounds with a history of biting, where theory was no substitute for instinct. The researchers critiquing him understood papers. They had not sat across from that. That was a fair point. But it wasn't the whole story. And what came next, almost nobody saw coming. The first major lawsuit arrived in 2006, barely 2 years into the show's run. Television producer Flody Suarez filed a claim in Los Angeles Superior Court alleging that his 5-year-old Labrador, Gator, had been injured at Caesar's Dog Psychology Center. The complaint described the dog being choked with a collar, forced onto a treadmill, and overworked until he was rushed to a veterinarian in critical condition, bleeding from the mouth and nose, covered in bruising, gasping for breath in an oxygen tent. Medical bills alone exceeded $25,000. The lawsuit was settled a year later, but the details were already out in the world. That same week in April 2006, a second lawsuit landed, a former publicist claiming she had originally conceived the name Dog Whisperer and that Caesar had taken the concept directly to the network without her knowledge. She was seeking more than $5 million in damages. 2 lawsuits in 1 week, in the show's second season. But the lawsuit that almost no one has talked about? That's the one that actually explains everything. Cesar Millan sued Miles Per Hour Entertainment, the production company that had built the show around him, claiming they had misappropriated back-end profits from a series. MPH countersued. Then an independent audit allegedly found that Caesar himself had shorted his financial obligations to the production company by more than $4 million. National Geographic discovered that episodes had been distributed on Hulu since 2009 without proper authorization, and moved to join the lawsuit to recover what it claimed were millions in unpaid revenues. The author of the Dog Whisperer book series sued Miles Per Hour separately for fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. By the time the final season aired in 2012, Caesar was suing Miles Per Hour. Miles Per Hour was countersuing Caesar, the network was trying to recover millions, and the book author was in court against the production company. Everyone who had built the show together was now suing each other simultaneously. No network renews a show under those conditions. The risk calculation was not close. But none of that, not the lawsuits, not the scientific criticism, not the advertiser concerns, was what actually broke Cesar Millan. That happened in 2010, and it happened fast. Daddy died in February of that year. Daddy was a 16-year-old pit bull who had been Caesar's most important working partner for the entire run of the show. Not a prop. Not a trained demonstration animal. A dog so naturally calm, so instinctively good at diffusing tension in anxious or aggressive animals, that Caesar used him as a living model of what balanced energy actually looked like. He had been there before the show existed, through every season, through every controversy. Losing Daddy was, by Caesar's own account, like losing a part of himself that could not be replaced. 4 months later, his wife Illusion filed for divorce. 16 years of marriage, 2 sons, the one private and stable space in a life that had been entirely public for almost a decade, gone. The man who had spent 9 years on television teaching families to be the calm and grounded presence their animals needed could not locate any calm inside himself. He attempted suicide. He overdosed on pills and was found unconscious. He survived. He has spoken about it publicly and with striking directness. "What doesn't kill you makes you stronger," he told the Tampa Bay Times. He said the experience changed how he understood the signs of depression, and that as a father, he now watches for those signs in his sons and the people around him with an attention he wouldn't have had before. He declined medication during recovery and chose instead to rebuild through exercise and through the work that had always given his life structure. And what he built next surprised almost everyone. The touring stage production he launched after the cancellation worked with shelter dogs in front of live audiences, animals that had never met him, carrying genuine behavioral issues, with no editing to smooth over the moments when things didn't go right on the first attempt. For a man whose critics had always argued that the television format concealed the real complexity of what he was doing, Performing live with unpredictable rescue cases was the most direct possible answer to that criticism. In 2014, Season 911 on Nat Geo Wild returned him to television, focusing on emergency cases, animals so dangerous their owners were days away from surrendering them. That show ran for 4 seasons. A YouTube channel he built crossed 1 million subscribers. He fell in love again and proposed to a woman named Jahira Dar in Athens, in front of the Acropolis. And in 2021, the same network that had ended Dog Whisperer 9 seasons earlier brought him back with a new show called Better Human, Better Dog. The critics who called him dangerous were not entirely right. The defenders who called him a misunderstood genius were not entirely right either. What researchers found in the years after the show ended was something more complicated. Some of the dogs Caesar worked with showed genuine long-term behavioral improvement. Others showed temporary suppression of symptoms that returned or worsened over time. The methods worked on some animals and caused harm in others, and the television format made it nearly impossible for viewers at home to know which category their own dog fell into. That, it turns out, is exactly what the show's own disclaimer was pointing toward. The warning telling viewers not to attempt these techniques at home was not routine legal protection. It was an acknowledgement by the network itself that what was being demonstrated was not universally safe to replicate. That notice ran in the credits of every single episode, for 9 seasons, while the network continued to air it and collect the advertising revenue. The story of Dog Whisperer is not simply about a man who got famous and got cancelled. It's about science catching up to instinct, money corroding a partnership, grief dismantling someone who looked unbreakable, and a network that knew more than it ever said out loud. 9 seasons, 176 episodes, 11 million viewers at its peak, and an ending that had been building from almost the very first day.